Positioning, the battle for your mind. We are talking about chapter 4. Chapter 4, and today is those little ladders in your head. Not what a lot like the little conversations in our heads, Ryan. Now the glasses are gonna have to come on for today, brother, because okay. So hold on. I got something for you here. Name your top. Name the top companies you like to wear.
Okay. Nike, brandless rescue goods, like to wear a lot of rescue stuff. The Gap, Banana Republic, they're owned by the same company. Let's see, Guess, and H&M. Zara. Let's throw Zara in there, yeah.
Okay. So it's funny. In this chapter, the author, I don't know if it's Al or Jack, which one, but he says, you ask anybody to name their top something, they're going to name 7. You just name 7. You had 6, and then you just threw in Zara, and you named 7. He says, and this is why things like $97 is a pleasing number. If you ask somebody what are the 10 commandments, they're usually only going to get 7. He says, that's why I asked you, because I wanted to see what.
Fucking, I fell in the trap. Fucking trap.
Brother, it was, so I'm reading this and I'm going, okay, what are my top 10 things I want, right? And I get to 7, and then I'm like, what's 8, 9, and 10? Like and then I ask myself the same thing. What are the top brands that I like to wear? I got to 7. I looked around and I said, what are the top things I like to use? I got to 7. Like it was great. And so what he's talking about is in individual pieces. So like I looked in my office, I said, what are the top things I use in my office? I got to 7. I went into my kitchen and I said, what are the top things I use in this kitchen? I'm thinking there's got to be more than 10 in my kitchen. Like I'm the cook, right?
Yeah.
And there was 7. I went even this far, Ryan. I went into the spice cabinet and I said, what are the spices I use? And I only found 5.
I was just gonna say, white people use seasoning. No, I'm just fucking with you.
Whoa. Good one, brother. Good one. I'm gonna have to start coming up with some jokes like that, y'all.
Oh yeah, you got
me down all the time, brother. You're tearing me down all the time. Ryan and I, just so everybody knows, we go back and forth, and he says he said he would really want to be a white person when it comes to tattoos.
Yes, 100%, man, 100%. Can you see all these tattoos? I don't think you really can, but look at dance. Yeah, see, look how beautiful that is, man. Like,
that's and they
okay. Jay, that's they got to pay for that. They got to pay for that. That's the private subscription.
Oh, buddy. Okay, chapter 4. Those little ladders in your head. What was the first piece that stuck out to you here?
Okay, so just a synopsis. So I'll answer your question after, but I really hated this chapter. I really hated this because here's what. Okay, for everybody who's watching out there, this is a great book, by the way. But the journey that they take us on, Dan, and maybe you can give me some clarity on this, right?
Yes.
We start this book saying that you want to be the best, you want to be number one, you always kind of want to be. That's the mindset of everything. And then you get into this chapter, and this is a very easy read, by the way. This is only, I think, it was like 3 or 4 pages. But then they start talking about being second best, and it's okay to be second. Like, if you're not going to be first, then be second. And I was like, why would you guys say that? But then they started to make sense with it. But then, I don't know, I just had that like bitter feeling of like, you lined us up, you set us the foundation saying that, if you're going to start a business, you're going to start anything, be the best, because if you're second, because I remember there was a direct quote for quote, if you're second, you're last. When we first, either the chapter 1 or chapter 2, and then they come in here and then they start talking about, start basically being second. And I think the big takeaways for me was like the human mind. And I started thinking about like the Pepsi challenge and the Coke challenge. This was when I was a kid. So when I was like 13, 14 years old, we used to go to Canada's Paramount's Wonderland or like Wild Water, any of those places. And then they would have those vendors and they would hide the Pepsi or the Coke bottle and they make you drink either one. And then your mind would be like, oh my God, this tastes like Coke. Oh my God, this tastes like Pepsi. And then I was always wrong because I was like, you could never really pick, right? But then you got prizes for it. And then they start going on. I felt like this chapter, Dan, was about like being second and how you can still win being second because Dan, when we go to our favorite restaurant, hey, can I get a Coke? hey, is Pepsi okay? You know, like I
Yes.
always like
Yes.
that. So that's just my mindset, Dan. Like
Yeah.
like I said, like I was just like, why would you go from there to there? So I'm intrigued to see what the rest of the book, and hopefully they bring this all together. I just hope like the next chapter, Dan, is not like, okay, being third is okay. You know? So
Okay, so I hear where you're coming from. So what the way I read it, and I don't know if it'll provide clarity or it's just gonna get even muddier. Um so when they were talking about the Coke or Pepsi and Hertz and right? So Hertz was the top car rental company.
yeah,
And what they were talking about is Avis's marketing was marketing that they're the top company. When everybody in their head, they're like, well, no, you're not, you're Hertz. So when they started saying, okay, we might not be number one, but we work harder, that was a massive campaign for them and made them hundreds of millions of dollars. The Pepsi and Coke challenge, when that was going on, Coke had the market share by quite a bit. And it's funny you mentioned the Pepsi Coke challenge because I just watched something on the 90s the other day with Christine, and they got into the Pepsi Coke challenge because in the 90s, Coke changed its formula. I don't know if you remember
yes,
that
they
or
did. Yeah, they did.
and trying to beat Pepsi. So what happened is Pepsi came out with the Pepsi challenge. So they blind taste tested, and out of I think it was like an 82% result that Pepsi tasted better when they didn't see the logo. And so what I saw with this chapter when they start getting into this is what we see we expect. So when they talk about, putting a French wine into a decanter and
Yeah,
saying it's a California brand or something, or which one
yeah,
tastes better. It was all you taste what you expect to taste is exactly what they said. So what I saw with this one is they're talking about the prime objective of advertising is to heighten expectations, create the illusion that their product or service performs miracles, the miracles you expect, and presto, that's exactly what the advertising does. But when they got into that Avis and Hertz and secondary one, they were talking about the against position. So there's
yeah,
like a product ladder, and then there's the against position. So I look at it like what we're doing right now, right, with Bridger. And I started immediately thinking of that, right? I started immediately thinking of if you work for a smaller brokerage and somebody comes to you and says, I use one of these multi-billion-dollar three-letter word brokerages or multi-billion-dollar brokerages that have, what do you do? Obviously one of the first responses most people have is, well, I work harder and you're not a number, right? You're an actual client at my
yeah,
company kind of thing. So
yeah,
that's the way I saw that number two aspect is only when it's in the against position. So if we take Bridger, for example, right? Bridger is not a Salesforce. We're not bigger than Salesforce. We're not bigger than HubSpot. But I'll tell you one thing, we listen to our clients' feedback more and implement that into the system faster than anyone. That's our positioning, right? And that's the against position. Never would we go out and record a video or say, you know what, we're going to crush Salesforce this year because they're so far ahead of Bridger. But Bridger's specific, right? Very specific to the logistics industry. So it's yes, we can say we are not a Salesforce, but we are going to work harder to make sure we bridge every single gap in your sales to give you a smoother sales logistics sales experience. That's a marketing point that we can make, because if somebody comes to our, and again, this is just the way I'm interpreting it, and hopefully it's processing for you. The way I interpret it is somebody comes to our website and we say, you know what, Salesforce sucks, HubSpot sucks, they're irrelevant in the industry, that somebody's gonna be like, are you guys stupid? Like, where do you live? Do you live under a rock? And that was the way I kind of took it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes sense when you're talking about like that. I still, like I said, I'm still against this chapter because I just think like it was horrible. But I understand what you're saying, right? From an aspect of I know when they were talking like really talking about specifically about like Pepsi and Cola and Coke for everybody who's watching. I think it was like the Uncola theory or something like that, or
The
Uncola,
that was
Uncola
right.
position.
7 Up.
Uncola
7 Up
position.
was the Uncola Cola.
Exactly, right. So that was always good. And realistically, when you look at it, that's like the third option, right? Because then you've got that balance of, what's Seven Up and I think Sprite. They're the compete. There's always going to be a competing. If we want to talk drinks, right? There's always going to be that competing. You got iced teas, root beers, and all that stuff. But coming back to it, when they talked about earlier in the chapter about when somebody says like something's diet, you already have in your mindset that it's not gonna taste good. Right, it's going to be that artificial sugar. The first thought I get is aspartame. When I hear like
aspartame, the aftertaste,
exactly that nasty taste, and we put that to a feeling, right? And bring this back to Bridger too, because I think it's an interesting topic to talk about. And for everybody out there, I like to bring this back to a logistics brokerage competitive advantage, because myself, I work within a smaller brokerage. My pitch really is the big guys are like letting you guys down. You guys are falling through the cracks because they have 1 million of you, like in terms of customers. And we've landed some amazing customers just by being that. I operate and say, look, we're a small team, we're like 4 or 5 of us, but nothing falls through all of us. We set up our group emails, nothing falls through the cracks. And then when you want to look at like CRMs, or you look at lead gen, everybody knows the top lead gen out there is ZoomInfo. Like call a spade, and everybody knows what the costs are for something like ZoomInfo. So you're paying for having that premium service, but then it's okay. Like Dan, you're talking about Avis and Hertz just now, right? What do? They supply rental cars. At the end of the day, I can go get a Civic at Avis and I can get a Civic at Hertz, and it doesn't matter. Like somebody down the road who's like watching me drive this car, they're not going to know. Do they still have like this? I don't think they still have the stickers and stuff like that on the cars anymore.
I don't.
I haven't rented a car since I was 18.
They got rid of that because people are from out of town, so they were like.
Yeah, I haven't rented a car. And shout out to Avis, because Avis was the only place that would rent a car to me when I was 18. Everywhere else was 19, and they used to tack on a bullshit like young driver's fee, which was really annoying. I think it's from like 19 to 21 or 22 or something 21, like that. 21. Yeah, I hated that fee. But anyways, coming back to it, it's an interesting thing to think about, because when we look at everything else, Dan, you mentioned 7 things that we always like right now. When we look at TVs, right? And everybody's like, okay, Samsung makes the worst fridges out there. Like I know this for a fact because my mom had a Samsung fridge, and it's the worst thing out there. So that means that that lane, maybe they should have stayed in the lane of making TV, electronics, phones, and all that stuff, but you still got to take those shots, right? And I think when it comes to when it comes to Bridger, it's just like, yes, we'll implement this faster. Who knows what those guys are doing on the other end? And full transparency, that's none of our business. We don't care, because if we're chasing those guys, and if everybody who's watching here is a logistics rep, if you're chasing what other companies are doing, oh, this customer works with X million, or like they work with different companies, it doesn't matter. It only matters what you bring to the table, what the impact you're going to bring. And I'll say this, Dan, with me being in the second position, I love this, being a logistics sales rep, Dan, because for everybody out there, it's really easy to actually make an impression in customer. Everyone's talking about it's a down market, but people are saying the same exact things to different shippers. I saw a post yesterday on LinkedIn, which was exactly like that. A guy talked about shipping managers, and they got the spray and pray. They got the, hey, we have this and different things. So if you're looking for something, a different result, you have to try something different and outside of the box. And Dan, I will share a quick story here that I think is just really important. Right now, we're working on a project for a customer. And we found out that we're shortlisted with like 3 or 4 different suppliers. So I spoke with my operations manager. I'm like, okay, what are the 3 other 4 companies going to be doing? Let's do the opposite of it. And that's worked wonders for us, and something that's kind of like think outside the box. So coming back to this chapter itself, with like, even if you are in that second position, even let's say we're going into RFP season right now, if you see that you have that yellow light off of first round, figure out that it's not only rates, try to think outside of the box. Don't get so excited when it turns green, because it's eventually going to turn green, but is that freight going to come within? So I like I said, this chapter was like a little bit hit and miss for me, but I'm starting to understand it a little bit more. Now we're talking through this, and this is what the book club is for, because if I was reading this independently, I probably would have been like, F this book, F this chapter, I'm not reading this anymore, because these guys are all hypocrites. They said something in chapter 1 and they went against it, and then
Ryan, here's the thing, let's talk about this for a second, because you brought up probably the most valid point. You're going in the exact against position. So what you're doing, where you said, hey, all these guys are going this way, we're going to go this way. Yeah. That's the against position. That's exactly what they're talking about in this chapter. You've already done it. Before you even read this chapter, you've already done it. Same thing when it comes to like the Sprites and ginger ales, right? So when 7-Up did the Uncola cola, what they were doing was they were saying, hey, all you Coke and Pepsi drinkers, you're not our crowd.
Yeah.
It's people that don't want those dark colas. That's where they want to dominate the market space. The light cola, right? That's why they called it the uncola. You saying, okay, we're on a short list. There's 4 people. What are the 3 of these companies doing? You're going against that and going this way in order to redefine yourself and put yourself in a blue ocean. Let them fight it out in the red ocean with all the chum in the water. You're in the blue ocean looking for that island.
Yeah.
And I that is what I understand anyways from when I read this. If you take like first and second out of the equation, this is exactly what you did. And it's the best strategy, because now you're coming at it and the customer is going to say, oh my God, look at this. Here's 3 exact answers, but here's one that makes us think.
Yeah.
And I think that is spectacular. The fact that you've implemented the against position before you even read the book, I think is even better, Ryan. It means you're thinking, it means you're being creative. It means you're coming out and really trying to segregate yourself. And I don't even know if that's the proper wording. Like you're putting yourself out at the front of the pack of the 4 of these people, these companies that are in this thing. Guaranteed, brother.
Yeah, and I think that's with lessons that you kind of learn as well. So I think it's great with this, like for us, like a short story, like we've done like military shipments, and anybody who does military shipments, one of the number one things that they talk about is that, hey, they got to be a U.S. citizen, and normally we're pulling from Canada. To find that in Canada is really like it's very rare. So all these guys are trying to find like U.S. citizens in Canada. What we did was like, hey, we got a Canadian driver and we just transloaded it 5 kilometers away or 5 miles away and just gave it to a U.S. company, and they delivered it on behalf, brought back the trailer, right? And I think with like this, like we said, we're going against the against position. Pepsi and Cola is obviously the number one thing out there, but I'd love to think of some other solutions out there, Dan. What is it? Let's just talk about it. Let's see.
Okay, so here's one. You look at the electric car.
Yes.
Okay. So you have Tesla, and then you have electric cars.
Yes.
Right. Ford's Mustang is not trying to say we're better than Tesla. What they're doing is they're going after Mustang fans that want the electric ride. Tesla is not going after the person that makes $40,000 a year. Tesla is going after the high-end people. Tesla's whole marketing at the beginning was the environment. So they were touching on environmental people. Then they started to go and they started to advertise and market into the cost savings people when gas started to rise. So they were altering their positioning in the market. But if you look at it and you look at, some of the new electric vehicles out that are taking direct aim at Tesla.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the other car companies are not taking direct aim, right? They're all kind of coming out with their own. But I look at the F-150 Lightning, for example. They're using the fact that the F-150 is the most sold vehicle in North America. There's more F-150s on the road than any other truck. So what they're doing is they're selling, they're positioning to F-150 owners, saying, hey, not only now do we have the best truck, but now it's all electric. Yeah. And so it's like they're not stepping up and saying, hey, are you buying a Cybertruck? They're shit. Buy an F-150.
Yeah. They don't need to compete. Yeah.
They're not competing. They're creating their own market or they're enhancing their own market. And that's the way I saw this is, Avis was number one in the industry. If somebody's number one and known, and I think this is where these ladders in our head, they start the chapter with the ladders in our head, right? And you don't really knock somebody off a rung. It's so hard to knock them off a rung, but you can get on another ladder, bring your own ladder and climb that rung. Because, and so like, there's so many pieces of the pie. So by Avis saying, hey, we're number one, Hertz is not, or whatever. Yeah. Hertz was not. Everybody in their mind is like, no, Hertz is like, I've heard of Hertz for years. I've never heard of Avis. Of course, Hertz is number one. So what it was saying is you're diminishing your positioning in the market by doing that. Instead of saying, hey, we might not be number one, but I'll tell you, we work harder than the number one guy, hint, harder than Hertz. Yeah. So then what's going to happen is the next time somebody goes to Hertz and has a bad experience, they're going to say, I'm going to try Avis next time because apparently they work harder. That was the way I got it. And if you look, like, we can do it in cars, we can do it in food. Like
Yeah.
Whole Foods does not compete with grocery stores.
No, they have their own they have their own ICP, and I think when you, especially if you're doing like a new product, right? I think in this chapter they talked about the first car was marketed as the first horseless carriage, right?
Yes.
So it was like kind of like that, and then when Diet Pepsi came, Diet Coke or whatever diet, they would be like, okay, sugar free. So it's always kind of like you look at a pain point, and then you're like, okay, well, we'll give you this opportunity here, and I think this is a great thing because in $100 million leads, Alex Hormozi talks about, dressing rooms. Back in the day, like dressing rooms changed how people bought clothing.
Yes.
They used to have like, you just go into the retail store, you'd buy the clothing, get home, change it, whatever it is. But then being able to actually like put on the clothes there, see it in the mirror, know that it fits. And even if you don't buy it, Dan, you're either gonna, nowadays you're either gonna take a picture, because like I'll be full transparency. Anytime I go like to Winners or Marshalls and I try something on, I'll send it to my wife. Hey, how does it look? It looks good. Okay, cool. And then even if I don't buy it, I still think about it, and that like reoccurring purchase. And I love what this chapter kind of brings about with that when it says that. And I love the analogies that you made about like Tesla and like other companies, because like right now it's just like they're not competing with each other. We never see advertisements for Rolls Royce or Ferraris or Lamborghinis. We'll never see those commercials ever because they don't need to be on TV. They don't need to have a Super Bowl commercial. Who's having a Super Bowl commercial? Those companies who want to be in your mind and have that market share.
Yep. Yeah, and you know what, Ryan, I'm glad you said that. One thing also in 100 million leads, the big thing I took from that also is when I leave the store, I'm fulfilled. Right? There's no uncertainty when I leave the store. Is this going to look good? I got to get home. It's like I can go in the store, I can try things on. I'm like, damn, this looks good. Buy it. And still go about my day without having to rush home and then worried about coming back. And, and so I think that's huge. We go back to the colas, right? You said sugar-free cola. Well, there's a reason why every company so let's talk about Coke and Pepsi. They have regular Coke and Pepsi. They have Diet Coke and Pepsi. Then they have Pepsi Max and Coke Zero. Yeah. So you have let's just go Diet and Coke, Pepsi Max and Coke Zero. Some people like that aspartame taste in Diet Pepsi or Diet Coke. The Coke Zero and Pepsi Max have none of they have a lot less bad stuff than the regular Coke and Pepsi, but they don't taste like aspartame. So now what they're doing is that one drink is going into 4 markets.
Yeah.
One drink, 4 markets, just by branching it off ever so slightly.
A little bit,
right?
Yeah.
And so to me, they're all marketed different. Right. Like, so if you look at like a Pepsi Max commercial, right, it's 0 taste of aspartame, but in the Diet Pepsi, it's sugar free. Yeah. Right. They don't want to bring up the aspartame because you just said it. You hate the taste of the aspartame. If you've had a Pepsi Max, I personally, before I got sick, Coke Zero or Pepsi Max, to me, I didn't taste aspartame. And I haven't had soda since I've recovered, but so I couldn't tell you but I couldn't taste it. But Diet Pepsi, I thought was better than Diet Coke. Diet Coke, I felt all I tasted was aspartame. Diet Pepsi was a little less. So it's like, you're advertising, you're positioning to all these different mindsets, right?
Yeah. And two, you look at just not with like Pepsi and Coke and things like that. I think like, you look at like Burger King and McDonald's, right? Burger King will always be number 2, right? And you got the Big Mac, but everybody knows what a Big Mac and a Whopper is, right? So nobody ever I hate those places. They're always gonna go with what they feel and emotional by. And I think maybe there's a case to study for everybody out there, even for us as well. Like we're talking about Pepsi, we talk about Pepsi and Coke quite a bit here. We're talking about McDonald's and Burger King. Their prices are so low. They're not a huge investment. Like you and I could go to McDonald's and Burger King right now. It's not going to break the bank. We're not going to have to take a mortgage for it. Like it's not a big decision for us to make that decision. Same thing with Pepsi and Coke. We're at the grocery store. We're just picking one and we're just making a decision based off of that. But then when we get into something like, let's say cars, like as you mentioned, or houses, or even owning a business, especially what we're seeing with Bridger right now, it's just like, okay, well, has this investment. How do we kind of stand out and be in that lead position? Because the conversation is a lot different because our consumers, they're going to have to fork out money to make sure that it's a fit for them. right?
Yeah.
Because like, bro, if we go and buy like $1 Coke and it doesn't taste good, what are we gonna do? We're just gonna chuck it, right? Like, how many times are you and I gonna go to Tim Hortons? They're gonna fuck up our orders. They never cut my bagels, by the way. And then we're gonna be like, okay, screw it. Maybe next time they'll cut my bagel properly. But then when you look at something like Bridger, a Salesforce, a HubSpot, any kind of CRM that you're using, because the scale of the investment that you're making, you're going to put a price to that. You know, you should have those expectations of the qualities or the products or the features that it's going to work to your own benefit.
Yes. Yes. I want to make sure we get to this, because I think the last sentence of the chapter, I think
the golf analogy
says it. No, says it all. So what he says is, if you want to be successful today, you can't ignore the competitor's position, nor can you walk away from your own. In the immortal words of Joan Didion, play it as it lays. So I think that's important, because like, I look at this and I say, how many times in logistics did I not play it as my cars were laid? Meaning, I got trucks in your area. No, you don't. You're just saying you do.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with that lane, and we do it all the time. No, we don't. We have no people in there. Put it on the load board, try and find somebody ASAP, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, we don't play it as it lays.
Yeah.
We kick the ball around, we fluff it up. Oh, that's what you meant by golf. Sorry.
Yeah. Take a drop.
Around, we fluff
take a drop.
bit.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I remember I went to PEI with a buddy of mine, and we went with 4 of us, and he was in like fescue that was like waist high. And I'm like, dude, are you sure you don't want to pull the ball? And he's like, no, I'm all good. And all of a sudden, this ball just goes 200 something yards to the green, lands and stops. And I'm like, holy crap, how did you do that out of the fescue? And I'm like walking up to him going, oh my God, that was an amazing shot. And as I give him a high five, I look down and he kicks a tee. So he actually teed his ball up in the fescue. No wonder it came out like that, right? So he wasn't playing the ball as it laid. He looked at his position and he said, there's no way I'm getting out of this. I have to manipulate it. And I think that's when we lose, when we stop and say, okay, instead of saying, okay, I'm going sideways, instead of going forward towards the green, I'm going to come out this way, then go that way. I'm going to take my stroke loss and move on, right?
Yeah.
So he's trying to position himself as, I don't know, I mean, I guess I'll use it as a pro golfer who could probably hit that shot 220 yards out of the fescue, right? That kind of, I guess, and I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know how that
100%.
story came up, but
no, that's a great story. That's an awesome thing.
Okay.
It was a great, like, I love how they ended it. Looking forward to chapter 5 next week.
Yeah.
And yeah, let's get to it.
You can't get there from here. I think that'll be cool. That'll be a good one. All right. Any closing words here, Ryan, for the weekend? Happy Diwali to everyone celebrating Diwali on Monday, right?
Sunday, but yeah, it's a long festival, so it'll be basically for next week. So hey, tip to everybody out there, you know, if you're looking for trucks, man, a lot of drivers are going to be off the road, so you should have planned accordingly. So yeah, happy Diwali, everybody celebrate.
I like that. You should have planned accordingly.